There is a syrup that makes maple taste simple. Maple syrup has one flavor, sweet caramel notes, pleasant but predictable. You have tasted it 1,000 times. You will taste it the same way 1,000 more. This other syrup has 17 distinct flavor compounds that maple does not contain: wintergreen, honey spice, wild berry, dark fruit, molasses. Flavors that unfold across your tongue in waves, changing as they develop, finishing differently than they started. Chefs who discover it never go back to maple. They call it complex, sophisticated, the syrup that makes maple taste like sugar water. This syrup contains minerals that maple cannot match: manganese at levels that support bone health, potassium that regulates blood pressure, calcium that strengthens teeth, zinc that boosts immunity, copper that builds collagen. The tree that produces this syrup lives for 100 to 150 years. It can be tapped every spring for a century. Your great-grandchildren could harvest syrup from a tree you tap today. This tree grows where maple cannot survive. It grows in Alaska, where winter temperatures reach 60 below zero. It grows in Scotland, where maple has never taken root. It grows in Siberia, across Scandinavia, throughout Canada, and across most of the United States. It is the most widely distributed hardwood tree in the Northern Hemisphere. Over 500 million acres of this tree grow across North America alone. Billions more across Europe and Asia. More trees than any syrup industry could ever tap. And Americans pour maple syrup on their pancakes, paying premium prices for an inferior product from trees that grow in a fraction of the territory. The tree that makes better syrup is growing in your neighborhood right now. It might be growing in your yard. You have walked past it 1,000 times without knowing it could replace everything in your pantry that says maple. Today, we are opening the file on the syrup tree that outperforms maple in every measurement, the sweetener that indigenous peoples perfected over thousands of years, the flavor that makes chefs abandon maple forever, and the industry that has made sure you never knew an alternative existed. If this matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. The file is open. The tree is called Birch betula, paper birch, yellow birch, sweet birch, river birch, silver birch. Dozens of species across the Northern Hemisphere, all producing sap that can be transformed into syrup. The white-barked trees that line roads and fill forests. The trees that drop catcons in spring and turn gold in autumn. The trees so common that no one thinks of them as food. They are food. They have been food for longer than maple syrup has existed. The indigenous peoples of North America tapped birch trees for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. The Ojibwe called the birch the giving tree. They tapped it for sap, used the bark for canoes, and harvested the wood for tools. No tree gave more than birch. The Cree drank birch sap, fresh as a spring tonic, a cleansing drink after the long winter. They boiled it into syrup when they needed concentrated sweetness. The Inuit, living far north of maple's range, relied on birch sap as their only source of tree sweetener. Where maple could not survive, birch thrived. Across the Atlantic, the same pattern repeated. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia tapped birch trees for millennia. They fermented the sap into wine, they reduced it to syrup, they built their spring rituals around the birch sap run. The Russians called birch sap birozovitsa and considered it medicinal. They believed it purified the blood, strengthened the body, and protected against disease. The Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Finns, and Swedes all developed birch sap traditions. Across the boreal forests of the world, people who lived with birch trees learned to drink from them. Modern science has validated what indigenous peoples knew in 2016. Researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks conducted the first comprehensive analysis of birch sap composition. They documented mineral concentrations that exceeded maple sap significantly. Manganese, 3 times higher than maple sap. Zinc, 2.5 times higher. Calcium, 40% higher. Potassium, 35% higher. Magnesium, 25% higher. The sap was not just sweet, it was a mineral supplement disguised as a beverage. The same study documented the presence of becalinic acid, a compound unique to birch. Becalinic acid has demonstrated anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and even anti-cancer properties in laboratory studies. Maple sap contains no becalinic acid. Maple syrup cannot provide what birch syrup provides. In 2019, researchers in Finland analyzed the antioxidant content of birch sap. They found polyphenol concentrations that matched or exceeded green tea. The spring tonic that indigenous peoples swore by was delivering antioxidant protection, that modern supplements try to replicate. The science confirms what tradition knew. Birch sap is medicine that tastes like dessert. But the syrup is where birch truly surpasses maple. Maple syrup requires approximately 40 gallons of sap to produce 1 gallon of syrup. The sugar content of maple sap is 2 to 3%. Boiling removes water and concentrates sugar. Birch syrup requires approximately 100 to 150 gallons of sap to produce 1 gallon of syrup. The sugar content of birch sap is only 0.5 to 1%. More water must be removed to reach syrup concentration. This difference seems like a disadvantage. More sap required, more energy to process. But this difference is exactly what makes birch syrup superior. The extended boiling time triggers Maillard reactions, the same chemical process that makes bread crust delicious and steak develop flavor when seared. Sugars and amino acids in the sap combine under heat to create new flavor compounds. The longer the boil, the more compounds develop. The more compounds, the more complex the flavor. Maple syrup boils quickly. Few Maillard compounds develop. The flavor remains simple. Birch syrup boils slowly. Dozens of Maillard compounds develop. The flavor becomes complex. Dr. Daniel Bunker, a food scientist at the University of New Hampshire, analyzed birch syrup flavor compounds in 2020. He identified over 50 distinct aromatic compounds compared to 15 in maple syrup. Birch syrup is to maple syrup what a fine wine is to grape juice, he wrote. The complexity is in a different category entirely. The flavor profile includes notes that maple cannot produce. Wintergreen from methyl salicylate, naturally present in birch sap. Wild honey from specific Maillard compounds. Dark fruit, reminiscent of prunes or figs. Spice, similar to clove or allspice. Molasses, from extended caramelization. Mineral notes from the concentrated minerals. Chefs who work with birch syrup describe it as a finishing syrup, not a pouring syrup. A tablespoon transforms a dish. A drizzle elevates a dessert. Michelin-starred restaurants pay $30 to $50 per pint for artisan birch syrup. They use it where maple would disappear, where complexity is required, where ordinary sweetness is insufficient. The syrup that most Americans have never tasted commands prices that reflect its superiority. The question is why Americans do not produce it themselves. The answer is the maple syrup industry. The maple syrup industry generates approximately $500 million per year in North America. Quebec alone produces 70% of the world's maple syrup. Vermont, the second largest producer, has built its tourism identity around maple. The industry is concentrated, the supply chain is established, the marketing is relentless. Every spring, media coverage celebrates the maple sap run. Stories feature sugar houses and pancake breakfasts. The imagery is embedded in American culture. Maple syrup is the syrup of tradition. This cultural dominance was not accidental, it was constructed. Maple syrup producers organized in the early 1900s. They created marketing associations. They lobbied for favorable regulations. They positioned maple as authentically American. Birch syrup received no such promotion. The trees that produced it were too widespread. No single region could claim ownership. No producer association formed to market it. No tourism industry developed around it. The very abundance of birch trees prevented commercial organization. Why develop an industry around a tree that grows everywhere? There was no scarcity to exploit, no regional identity to market. Maple syrup succeeded commercially because maple trees grow in a limited range. Sugar maples thrive only in northeastern North America. This geographic concentration allowed Quebec and Vermont to dominate production and control pricing. Birch trees grow everywhere. No one can dominate birch, no one can control pricing. The market dynamics favor maple because scarcity creates value. The industry promoted what it could control and ignored what it could not. Agricultural extension services taught maple sugaring, not birch sugaring. State fair competitions featured maple syrup, not birch syrup. Recipe books specified maple syrup, never mentioning alternatives. Within 2 generations, Americans forgot that birch syrup existed. The forgetting was so complete that many people today do not believe birch trees can be tapped. They assume maple is the only syrup tree. They have never encountered information that suggested otherwise. This is not because the information does not exist, it is because no industry profits from spreading it. The climate advantage of birch is overwhelming. Sugar maples require specific conditions: cold winters with temperatures below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, spring days above 40 degrees, followed by nights below freezing. Moderate summer temperatures, adequate moisture, well-drained soil. These conditions exist in a narrow band of North America: southern Quebec, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, parts of New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Below this band, winters are too warm. Above it, growing seasons are too short. Maple syrup production is constrained by climate to perhaps 5% of North American territory. Birch trees laugh at these constraints. Paper birch grows from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from New Mexico to Alaska. It survives winter temperatures of 60 below zero. It tolerates summer heat that would stress maples. Yellow birch occupies similar range. Sweet birch extends through the Appalachians. River birch grows throughout the South, where no maple sugar is possible. Silver birch blankets Europe from Scotland to Siberia. Millions of square miles where maple has never grown, but birch thrives. The tree that makes superior syrup grows in 20 times the territory of the tree that makes inferior syrup. A family in Georgia can tap birch trees. A homesteader in Alaska can tap birch trees. A farmer in Scotland can tap birch trees. They cannot tap maple trees. They do not live in maple territory. They have been excluded from tree-tapped sweetener entirely by the false assumption that maple is the only option. This assumption serves the maple industry. It does not serve the millions of people who could make their own syrup if they knew birch existed. Tapping birch is nearly identical to tapping maple. The season is the same: late winter to early spring, when days warm above freezing but nights remain cold. The freeze-thaw cycle creates pressure that pushes sap out of tap holes. Birch sap typically runs 1 to 2 weeks later than maple sap. The trees break dormancy later. A region that sees maple runs in March may see birch runs in late March or April. The equipment is identical. Spiles, the small spouts inserted into tap holes, work the same for both trees. Buckets or tubing collect the sap. Storage containers hold sap until processing. Drill a hole approximately 2 inches deep into the trunk, angled slightly upward. Insert a spile. Hang a bucket or attach tubing. Wait. A healthy birch tree produces 5 to 15 gallons of sap per tap per season. Multiple taps can be placed in large trees, one for every 8 inches of trunk diameter. The sap that flows is clear, slightly sweet, and immediately drinkable. Many tappers consume fresh birch sap as a beverage before processing any into syrup. Fresh birch sap tastes like water with a hint of sweetness and a subtle minerality. It is refreshing in a way that no processed beverage matches. Indigenous peoples who drank it as a spring tonic were drinking something that deserves revival. Processing birch sap into syrup requires patience. The lower sugar content means more boiling. Where maple sap boils down 40 to 1, birch sap boils down 100 to 1 or more. This extended processing creates challenges. Birch sap contains fructose, not sucrose like maple. Fructose caramelizes at lower temperatures. Careless boiling produces burnt flavors instead of complex flavors. The solution is lower heat and longer time. Where maple syrup can be boiled vigorously, birch syrup should be simmered gently. The process takes longer but produces superior results. Many producers use reverse osmosis to remove water before boiling. This technology, common in maple operations, works equally well for birch. It reduces boiling time and fuel consumption while preserving delicate flavors. The finished syrup should reach 66 to 68% sugar concentration, measured with a refractometer or hydrometer. Below this concentration, the syrup may ferment. Above it, crystals may form. Color ranges from amber to nearly black, depending on processing method and sap characteristics. Darker syrups typically have more intense, complex flavors. Store in glass jars, refrigerated after opening. Properly processed birch syrup keeps indefinitely unopened and several months after opening. The yield is modest compared to maple. Expect 1 gallon of syrup from 100 to 150 gallons of sap. A backyard operation with several trees might produce a few quarts per season, but those quarts will be unlike anything you have purchased. The uses extend far beyond pancakes. Birch syrup's complexity makes it a culinary ingredient, not just a sweetener. Glaze salmon with birch syrup and watch the fish transform. The minerality of the syrup complements the richness of the fish. The caramelization under heat creates a crust that maple cannot produce. Dress salads with birch syrup, vinaigrettes. The wintergreen notes cut through rich greens. The dark fruit flavors pair with nuts and cheese. Finish roasted vegetables with a drizzle. Root vegetables especially benefit. The earthy flavors of beets and carrots meet their match in Birch's molasses depths. Bake with birch syrup, where recipes call for maple. Use 25% less, as the flavor is more intense. Gingerbread, spice cakes, and dark breads develop new dimensions. Mix cocktails with birch syrup. Old fashions gain complexity. Whiskey sours develop depth. Any drink that uses simple syrup improves with birch. Create dessert sauces by warming birch syrup with butter. Pour over ice cream, bread pudding, or grilled fruit. The sauce will not taste like anything your guests have experienced. The limit is imagination. Once you have birch syrup in your kitchen, maple syrup will seem like a placeholder for the real thing. The economics favor the home producer. Commercial birch syrup sells for $30 to $50 per pint. The labor-intensive processing justifies the price. Homemade birch syrup costs almost nothing. The trees are free. The equipment costs under $50 for a basic setup. The fuel for boiling might cost a few dollars. A family that taps birch trees produces a luxury ingredient for pennies. They remove themselves from a market that charges premium prices for inferior maple. More importantly, they reconnect with a tradition older than their nation. The great-grandparents who tapped birch trees in Scandinavia or boiled maple in Vermont understood something we have forgotten. Sweetness comes from the land. It flows in spring when the earth awakens. It requires patience and attention and gratitude. Industrial sweetener production has severed this connection. Sugar appears in bags, produced somewhere else by someone else. Syrup appears in bottles, processed in facilities we will never see. Tapping trees restores the connection. You know where your sweetness comes from because you stood beside the tree and watched it flow. This knowing has value that no price can capture. The birch trees are waiting. They have been waiting for a century, while Americans poured maple syrup and never questioned whether alternatives existed. They have been waiting while the maple industry promoted its product and ignored the superior competition. They have been waiting while families paid premium prices for a syrup that birch surpasses in every measurement. The white bark gleams in every northern forest. The graceful branches bend in every spring wind. The sap rises every year whether anyone taps it or not. 500 million acres of birch trees across North America. Billions more across Europe and Asia. More trees than all the maple syrup producers could ever exhaust. Growing where you live, producing what you need, requiring only that you know they exist. Now you know. Better than maple syrup, more minerals, more complexity, more flavor compounds, more territory, more tradition. Taps for 100 years. A tree you tap today, your great-grandchildren will tap. Grows in any climate, Alaska to Georgia, Scotland to Siberia. Wherever you live, birch lives nearby. The only question remaining is why you are still buying maple. The industry hopes you keep buying. Keep believing maple is the only option. Keep paying premium prices for simplicity when complexity grows free in your neighborhood. Or you could tap a birch tree. One hole, one spile, one bucket. The syrup that makes maple taste like sugar water, flowing from a tree you never knew could feed you. The giving tree, still giving, after all these years. If this video helped you subscribe and hit the bell, every share spreads what they wanted hidden. The next video opens soon.